Hey, hi, how you going? It's your mate Valstride, and today we're back with another unit upgrade guide. This time we're looking into Temple, and the aim of this video is just to give you some insight into what each of the different upgrade paths is going to offer so that you can use that to inform your decision making and pick whichever one is going to best suit your playstyle. Let's check it out. Alright, so we're just going to kick it off with tier 1, and I will be going through each of these in order. And remember, if you do enjoy this content, like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps support the channel a lot. But we've got our choice here between the Sun's Aegis and the Guard Captain as the upgrade for the Swordsman. So I think this is going to ultimately come down to whether or not you want your tier 1 unit to be heavily involved in doing damage. So the Guard Captain is definitely going to be the better choice for that because they have the double strike ability, but you can see here that they do have lower stats across the board with the exception of speed, but that speed is going to be incredibly important if you want them to go out and get aggressive. That being said, I personally prefer the Sun's Aegis, and it's mainly due to the Aegis ability, which is going to give that ranged damage reduction to them and an adjacent creature. So you can see the Guard Captain does have the ranged defense ability, which gives that damage reduction to itself, but this is going to share that to another, or in fact, potentially multiple units across your team if you've got them all stacked up against each other. So you can really use this to protect your more valuable units from enemy range. And the other thing I like about these guys being a more defensive option is that they have the Anointed for Defense passive, which is just going to make them incredibly tanky. That alongside their just base stats, which are much higher, they're going to be much tankier than the Guard Captains, and that will just allow them to soak up a whole bunch more damage for you, which I think is really important or valuable on a tier 1 unit because the enemy AI does seem to spend a lot of time and focus on your tier 1 units. So if you can just have them act as a meat shield and take a whole bunch of damage, that translates to survivability for your other creatures. And if your other creatures are surviving more, that translates to more damage anyway. So you sort of make up for the damage in that roundabout way. Now, whether or not that actually ends up being enough extra damage to outweigh just having double strike in the first place, I'm not really too sure. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think it would. So if you do want a damage dealing unit, then go with the Guard Captain, but my preference is for the defensive style, so I always like to go with the Sun's Aegis. Moving straight into the tier 2, we're looking at upgrades for the crossbowman here. So our choice is between the Austringer and the Marksman, and these are both going to be really good choices. I think Temple's tier 2 is arguably the best in the game, though the more I play with the dungeon tier 2, the more I like it, so that opinion might change soon. But these are both going to be really good options. I think I personally just prefer the Austringer because you are going to get a little more damage output out of these guys thanks to having the double shot ability. But there is a nice, neat little trick I like to do with the Marksman, even if I am using the Austringer as my primary unit, and that is to create single stacks of these guys to utilize their piercing shot ability. So if you hit an enemy unit with piercing shot, they are going to take 20% extra damage from all of your other units, and you only need one single marksman to apply this damage bonus. It doesn't matter how many units are in the stack, 20% extra is 20% extra. So I like to fill out my empty party slots with just single stacks of these guys, at least until I start getting all of those other tiers of units, and I think that is a really good way to maximize your damage efficiency early on. But another way to do that is to pair the Austringer with Zenith. So the reason you would want Zenith here is because she is going to start the game with access to Heavenly Blades as her signature spell, and Heavenly Blades is going to deal 100 pure damage for every attack. So we've got the double shot here, meaning we get up to 200 pure damage for every attack with an Austringer, even if you've got only one in the stack. So you can create 7 single stacks of these, and that is going to be a ton of damage early on that is just going to allow you to clear those early neutral stacks much faster than your opponents. Griffin's up next, and this one is actually quite hard. I'm still undecided as to which of these I prefer. The Temple Griffins do have higher speed and initiative, which I value very highly. That initiative 12 is an incredibly high stat across all of the factions, so it is going to guarantee that you go first a lot of the time, which is obviously going to matter in hero battles if you want to make sure that you're getting the first spell off. So if you want to get that guaranteed first spell, then Temple Griffins might be the go for you. And I think overall, they're just going to be the more aggressive unit. You can see that you've got more attack and defense here on the Guardian Griffin. And the damage card does say that you have higher damage, but we do have to be careful about that because that's just a product of how this card reads. It always shows the lower bound of your damage rolls. So you can see that the Guardian Griffin is going to roll 7 to 7, so you're always going to get a flat 7, but the Temple Griffin is going to roll 5 to 9, so you are actually going to average out at 7 anyway. And when you combine that with the speed and initiative, I would say that the Temple Griffin is going to be the more aggressive option if you want to use your Griffins that way. And that does really pair well with the Alert 2 passive, which is going to give it endless counterattacks. That being said, I actually don't really like to use my Griffins that way because I don't find that they're tanky enough to do so. So I prefer to use my Griffins more as a cleanup unit to just clean up all of those weakened units on the battlefield. But I might just be using them wrong. If your playstyle is to just send them out there and have them attack, the Temple Griffin might be the option for you. One nice thing about the Guardian Griffin that I haven't yet mentioned though is that it has the Loyal Protector ability, which is going to allow it to counterattack for your other units. And this pairs really nicely with the Taunt spell. So if you can get a Taunt going on one of your tankier units, and then you can just sit your Guardian Griffin right next to that unit, you are going to get a lot of free counterattacks there, which is pretty neat. Overall though, both good options. I think if I had to pick one, gun to my head, I'm going to go with the Temple Griffin just because of the extra speed and initiative. I think that's pretty hard to beat. Moving on to tier 4 next, we're looking at upgrades for the Light Weaver. So we've got a choice here between the Hierophant and the Sun Herald. And I think aesthetically, these are some of my favorite unit designs in the game. These guys are badass and a much needed upgrade from the boring old monk. Now, I tend to find myself opting for the Sun Herald, and the main reason for it is just because of the extra damage output you're going to get, and I like to play Temple as a ranged damage dealing faction. I think they're really good for that, so I find myself going for the Sun Herald. You've got the extra attack here, you've got the extra initiative, though both of these initiatives are quite low anyway. You do have a little less speed, but that's not really going to matter because you're a ranged unit, and I find that the lower defense doesn't really matter that much either, because if you just protect your ranged units sufficiently, then you're not going to take that much damage. Obviously, it does matter for taking enemy ranged attacks, but overall, I don't find it to be as impactful as these other stat differences. They've also got the Anointed for Damage passive, which is going to proc a lot because you're going to be buffing up your units as a Temple player all of the time, like we talked about when we looked at the upgrades for the Swordsman. But if you're looking for a more supportive unit, then the Hierophant is probably going to be the one for you because I think you're going to get more utility out of these active abilities. So Inner Light is an incredibly powerful buff, and it plays especially well with the way that Angels work because they are able to absorb all of the buffs from your other units. So you can use this ability on your crossbowmen or your cavalry or something like that, and then your angels are going to get the same buff. And the dispel effect from Holy Absolution is incredibly good as well, and I think that's going to matter a lot more once we start getting PvP, though I don't really find myself using it that often at the moment, but that's just because the AI isn't that good with spells, to be honest. So maybe more functionality out of this in the future, but for now I'm going to be going with the Sun Herald. Moving on, we're looking at upgrades for the cavalry next, but I'm going to be honest, this is one of those units that you really need to think carefully about as to whether or not you actually want to invest the resources into upgrading them. And especially if resources are tight, maybe you're playing on one of the lower resource templates like fair and square, then it just might not be worth doing. You're probably better off spending those resources on something else. But this is an upgrade guide, so I am going to be talking about the pros and cons of each of these either way. I find myself just tending to go for the Sunspear Cavalry, and the main reason is just the better stats across the board, with the exception of initiative, which we're going to talk about more in just a moment. But they also have this Anointed for Attack passive, which is going to lead to more damage output. However, 14 initiative is nothing to scoff at. In fact, this is the second highest initiative of any creature in the game. The only creature that has more initiative than this is the Black Dragon, but even then, a lot of dungeon players are opting to go for the Ashen Dragon instead. So if you do select the Noble Cavalry, then you're going to be going first almost every time. It's almost a guarantee. And as we talked about with the Griffins, that is incredibly valuable because it lets you get off the first spell. And I think this is going to be really viable if you pair it with the charge ability. So this is going to increase the initiative of all of your other creatures as well, which is going to bump them up in the turn order. The problem with this though is that it does require 2 focus charges. So you're going to have to really build into this and either have a hero that is starting the game with a bunch of focus charges, or you're just going to have to make sure that the first spell you cast is Energize. But the trade-off with that is obviously you're casting Energize instead of something else. That could be a buff spell, it could be a damage or a debuff spell, whatever. There's a trade-off, there's an opportunity cost there, right? So I think there is viability. I'm not sure how valuable that is going to be, but nonetheless, acting first is incredibly strong. I just still don't know if it's worth the trade-off for all of these other stats though. But we've got just 2 more to go, and we're looking at upgrades for the Inquisitor next. So our choice is between the Excommunicator and the Mother Superior, and both of these are going to be excellent choices. You can't really go wrong here. My favorite thing about this unit is just how tanky it is, so you can easily get it out there, get it into the action, and not have to worry about taking too many losses. But what I think your choice here is going to ultimately come down to is whether or not you went for the more aggressive or defensive options earlier on. So for example, if you went with the Sun's Aegis and the Guardian Griffin and the Hierophant, for example, then you might want to choose the Excommunicator here because you're going to get more damage output and your other units are going to be able to support the Excommunicator. And they do have a really nice active ability here, Swift Penance, which is going to do some good AoE damage, and they're statted for damage as well. But if you went for the more aggressive options earlier on, maybe you've got the Guard Captain, the Temple Griffin, and the Sun Herald, then you might want to go for the Mother Superior because they're going to be able to just absorb more damage. And these guys get so tanky. They are such a pest to take down. You're not going to feel bad about just sending these out there to eat up the enemy attacks. They also have this active ability that is going to allow them to do AoE damage with their attack, and that's going to be really nice as well. So don't underrate that. Like, these guys are still going to do a bunch of damage. It's not like they're going to slack off in that department. I think you're just going to get a little bit more out of the Excommunicator. But either way, both of these are excellent choices. You are not going to be disappointed with these units. But we've made it all the way to tier 7, so we're looking at upgrades for the Angels, and if you've seen my units tier list, then you will know that I think Angels are the best tier 7 unit in the game. These dudes are incredibly strong. They're going to do it all. They're a ranged tier 7 unit, so they're reminiscent of the Titans of old, going to do a ton of damage. And what really makes them shine, in my opinion, is this Forging Perfection ability, which you are going to get on both upgrades. And that is going to make it so that all positive effects applied to any single unit within your party is going to also be applied to the Angels. So when you combine that with just how well the Temple faction can utilize buffs in general, these get out of hand very, very quickly. Now, as for which unit is actually better, I would be lying if I didn't confess that my decision making is at least in part swayed by just how much cooler the Archangels look. These dudes look sick. I think they look a lot better than the Apotheses option, who just kind of have this Roman armor going on. It's a little bit bland, whereas these dudes look epic. But there is a lot going on for them, practically speaking. So for example, you're not going to suffer the range penalty on the Archangels because they have the sharpshooter ability, meaning that their damage output is going to be a little bit better. And that is how I like to play Temple as a whole, is have all of my ranged units just doing all of the damage. I like to just rush my economy early on and try and get to the Archangels as fast as possible, and then have all of my other units supporting those ranged units. So overall, the way I like to set up my team is to go for the Mother Superiors, and then I use the Sun Herald here for damage. I do still go with the Temple Griffin, and I like to go with the Sun's Aegis like I mentioned earlier, and I'll just stick those Sun's Aegis right between my Angels, my Crossbowmen, and my Sun Heralds if I can, and then I just send out the Mother Superiors to take up a whole bunch of the enemy's damage, and then I'll use my Griffins to pick off enemies as they start getting closer. And that's kind of like the synergistic way I like to use all of the different units. So going for Archangels there really, I think, leans into that strategy. But there is a lot going on for the Apotheses as well. I mean, it just straight up has better bulk in the health and defense stats by quite a significant margin, and that is really important on your tier 7 units because losing a tier 7 unit is obviously more impactful than losing a lower tier unit, and they're going to have the higher speed here, which does allow them to get out there into the fight much faster. Now, you might be wondering, hang on, why would I want my ranged unit getting out there? And that is because the Apotheses is a hybrid unit and can do just as much melee damage as it can range damage. So if you want it to get out there into the action, it certainly can. And it is also going to have a really nice passive ability in Purity Aura, which I think is going to be stronger once we get PvP, like I talked about before, because those debuffs and those negative effects are going to be much more potent in that format. But at the moment, the AI just doesn't really feel like it utilizes its debuff spells very well. So I don't really feel like I'm really wanting that at any given time. It also has a nice active ability here, Unending Pride, but I don't think that active ability is anywhere near as good as Devouring Chalice, which is going to steal all of the positive effects from your opponents and give it to the Archangels. So I think the Archangels win out here in the active ability slot as well. But that's going to do it for this one. I hope you guys found this helpful, and I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments down below as to which setups you prefer to go with. And keep your eye out on the channel for the Schism and Dungeon upgrade guides. They're going to be coming soon. But otherwise, thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time. Have a good one.